For most of the 20th century, we used natural products as the starting point for a good number of drugs. Something like over 70% of the oncology drugs that were developed before the year 2000 were either a natural product that we pulled out of nature and put right in human, was a derivative, or we discovered the target or the mechanism using a natural product and then developed a synthetic drug. So natural products have always been very important in the drug discovery process. The sad part is over the last 20 years, we've gotten away from using them.
Welcome to the Precision Total Health Podcast with Lori Aikman. All right, today on the podcast, we have Dr. Keith Ellis. Dr. Keith is a scientist and associate professor of medicinal chemistry that is using his knowledge and expertise in medicinal chemistry, pharmacology, and natural products to research the biological mechanisms that cause long COVID and create custom-formulated over-the-counter solutions for long COVID that are safe, inexpensive, and accessible for everyone. Wonderful. Awesome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear, just obviously, how did you, come to start working with long COVID?
Sure. So I am kind of by training and by profession, I'm a medicinal chemist. So medicinal chemistry is the subdiscipline of chemistry that's really involved with designing, discovering, and making drugs. Right. So most of my career, I have worked in what I think of as the kind of early lead discovery space, where I'm looking at new biological targets, usually proteins, and that have been discovered to be relevant in a disease state, validated target that we can start drug discovery on. And that's kind of the work that I like to do, is to find those initial molecules that we call hits and develop those into lead and do what we call lead optimization and try and find the best molecule, right? That's kind of the space I usually work in. In early 2023, and in the past, I have mainly worked in oncology and a little bit in antibacterials. And in 2023, I decided that I wanted to start working on long COVID. We were kind of that 3-year point past the beginning of the pandemic. Acute COVID infections seem to kind of be something we understood and knew how to deal with, at least clinically. Viral infections aren't anything that were new when the pandemic had hit. It was just COVID was a new virus that we hadn't really experienced before. But, the death rate was really down from acute COVID. And I was interested in this emerging problem of long COVID and this kind of syndrome that seems to affect people and persist way beyond the acute COVID infection. I kind of started this as what would have been a normal academic project for me. I went to the scientific literature and I started doing the kind of research that I do and asking the questions that I would normally ask for any other disease state, and looking for molecular targets and trying to understand the molecular mechanisms of how the disease works in the body and understand, what we can do in terms of developing drugs to then go in and treat the disease. And that's when things kind of went off course and I went down the road less traveled, I guess you would say. And that's how it started. And then it went down this really interesting place.
Awesome. How fascinating. I just think that's so interesting you're just on the forefront. The work that you're doing is going to impact so many years to come and just the developments. So then how did things, take a turn then from there?
So in a normal project, I would have gone into literature, found a molecular target. I said, okay, great. And got started with one of numerous techniques we use to start discovering hits and drug leads. When I went to the long COVID literature, and granted, long COVID's a new condition, right? It didn't exist prior to 2020. So I didn't expect a huge body of literature, but I expected to find more than I did. And that's actually really what kind of kicked things down a different road. So I went into the literature, and after doing the normal searches I do, asking the questions, putting the time and work in that I normally do, I came away with this two feelings kind of simultaneously. One was kind of being shocked that despite the volume of papers being published, we didn't know more and know more that was really focused on trying to help people and actually do something. And that fact actually kind of made me a little mad. It made me a little angry and I try to always temper it with, in science, we always say we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? You have to compile a body of work in order to really address a disease state. And it still is relatively early in the long COVID story in terms of research. At the same time, there seems to be a lack of focus and a lack of urgency in the scientific literature, which I think is kind of what got to me and got me a little bit angry, because there's clearly people out there suffering from long COVID. There's not a lot of help for them. A lot of what is out there to help them has been kind of repurposed, and it is kind of a trial and error system at this point of trying to figure out what can really help people. So in looking at the literature, I decided that there wasn't really a path yet to go do traditional drug discovery and development, right? There's just not enough of the mechanistic data. I needed to do that. So knowing that it was such a big problem, though, I had gotten to know a couple of people that had long COVID and could see exactly how much they were suffering and how few options they had. I decided to go back to the literature and kind of start asking questions a different way. And I started kind of from a point of view of asking questions of, well, what do we know? Where is there enough data to do something, even if it's not the rigorous drug discovery and development process we would normally do to try and develop a real FDA-approved therapeutic? So I went back to the literature, and that's when I kind of found the vein in literature on microclots hypothesis. And microclots is a causative mechanism for long COVID, and looked at all of that data. And I spent a lot of time on that data because I'm a little bit different as a medicinal chemist for two reasons. One, I approach everything as a chemistry problem. Even biology is chemistry, right? Because when you look at mechanisms in the body, I look at them really at a molecular level. I want to think about them chemically. So that's kind of the first way it's different. And then I have a healthy skepticism of a lot of especially biological science data, because I'm kind of that prove me kind of guy, right? Because in chemistry, we prove things with real analytical data. It's a much easier way to prove things. Biology, you have to do a lot more work to really overcome that bar of having it being data that you can really rely on and draw conclusions from. So I spent a long time on the microclot hypothesis data. And by the time I was done, I was convinced. I said, okay, here is actually a mechanism where there is underlying data in the scientific literature that points to this being a potential causative mechanism for long COVID. I said, okay, great. What can we do about it, right? Because that's always the next question. Once we understand mechanisms, it's all right. Well, how can we help people with that knowledge? And fortunately, there's a really good team of scientists kind of worldwide that are working on microclot hypothesis. Some of the leading scientists that work on it, they did a small clinical study. And they took a pharmaceutical cocktail of 3 drugs called triple anticoagulant therapy and said, okay, can this work against microclots in long COVID? And they did a really nice study. And what I liked about it was, so all the patients that they chose, there was about 90 people. So it was a small study, but they were clinically diagnosed with long COVID. And they gave them triple anticoagulant therapy. And at the end of the study, about 80% of the people recovered from long COVID.
Wow.
Which is pretty good. It's a small study, right? It's one study, but that's a pretty robust response rate. And what I really liked about the study they did is these scientists have come up with a way to test blood samples in the laboratory for microclot. So they actually looked at the patient samples before therapy and then after therapy, and all the patients with long COVID had microclots before they started, and the ones where they recovered from long COVID, the microclots were gone. The ones that didn't recover, they weren't gone. Which is, again, pretty good evidence for me that's a real effect, and that actually really worked.
Right.
So I found that, and then I went back to all the people I knew with long COVID. I said, guys, this problem's fixed. Why aren't you guys all on triple anticoagulant therapy? Like, what's the holdup here? Why are people still suffering if we know this?
Yeah.
And it basically, the long COVID patients that I knew, they basically told me they can't get the therapy. And there's a couple issues with triple anticoagulant therapy, the pharmaceutical version, if you really look at it. One, it's three anticoagulants taken together. So there is a significant safety issue
Right.
with a side effect of uncontrolled bleeding being on three anticoagulants. So that's a legitimate issue. Because of that issue, and because I don't think there's enough data yet in the literature, physicians were somewhat understandably reluctant to prescribe it to people, right? So the patients would know about it. They would go to the physician and try and get a prescription for it. The physicians will be like, I'm not sure I'm ready to do that, right? So there's an access issue. And then one of the drugs in that combination therapy is not cheap. It's expensive. It's one of the newer anticoagulants that still has a pretty high price on it. So there's a cost issue. And then I've learned about more recently that in some cases, even if people can get a prescription for it, the pharmacist will dispense it because it flags in their system as a combination that shouldn't be given together.
Yeah.
So all of those together.
Drugs. Sorry, I'm just thinking from my, prescribing background. They would prescribe those three drugs together. It's not been put together in one pill yet.
No, it's three separate drugs that you take separate, right?
Okay.
So it's three separate prescriptions. So yeah, with anticoagulants that you usually are trying to be careful with any one individual one.
Exactly.
Right? There's kind of an issue. So I kind of got all that together, and I was looking at the situation. I said, well, what we really need is a version of triple anticoagulant therapy that is safer, which ultimately means less potent, right? That's how you improve the safety profile of that kind of drug, is to make it less potent. But a version of triple anticoagulant therapy that is safer, that's accessible, that people can get over the counter without a prescription, and that is affordable. And so I started thinking about that problem a little bit. And that's when I kind of drew even farther back on my training. I originally started out my career working on natural products. My PhD is actually in natural product total synthesis. And then when I moved into medicinal chemistry, my advisor, her lab, used natural products as the starting point to then optimize them into drug leads. So that was kind of the basis for my foundational training in what I do. I looked at this problem. I said, well, we need a safer version of this. We know we have the pharmaceutical drugs and they seem to work for people. And the typical process in science and in medicinal chemistry has been to start with a natural product and then use it as the starting point to design a drug. And I said, well, what if I just flip the script and reverse the process? And so I started working on trying to reverse engineer the pharmaceutical drugs back to natural ingredients that had the same mechanisms of action and would work the same in the body.
Wow. That's awesome. I'm cheating and I'm looking at the website and looking ahead here. That's amazing. So I'm just curious too actually, let's speak to that point. I had a couple of thoughts. So I love that you said that many drugs, right, start as natural substances, and I think that's something not all people know. And then I'm just curious do you work for a university?
Yep. Yes.
Or just funding too. Sometimes I think can affect, right, the ability that we have. There has to be somebody to pay people like you to do the research to find out these things and then make these drugs. So I like sometimes questions will, because I consider myself moderate. I'm a nurse practitioner. I come from an ICU background, but now I practice functional medicine. So I use both prescription and then more natural products. And that's something I explain to my patients sometimes is, right, there's not the rigorous study sometimes for these more natural things, and because there's not funding to have the trials and things. I don't know. I'm just curious if you can speak to that at all as far as
so just speaking first for natural products, and I actually teach in a natural products class every year. For most of the 20th century, we use natural products as the starting point for a good number of drugs. It changes depending on therapeutic area, but just for like oncology, something like over 70% of the oncology drugs that were developed before the year 2000 were either a natural product that we like pulled out of nature and put right in human, was a derivative, or we discovered the target or the mechanism using a natural product and then developed a synthetic drug. So natural products have always been very important in the drug discovery process. The sad part is over the last 20 years, we've gotten away from using them, which is a whole nother conversation and is an interesting point about,
Right.
particularly in the context of what I'm doing with long COVID. But that was kind of that different perspective that I brought to the problem. And, I started this looking for an academic project, figuring, okay, there's grants out there for long COVID. I can get a project going, apply for grants, write papers, do what I normally do. When this took a turn away from a more traditional drug discovery project, like you said, there's not a lot of funding out there to work on
Right.
non-pharmaceutical approaches.
Right.
So I basically made the decision then that I was willing to do it and I was going to do it. And I kind of made the decision that I wasn't going to even try for grants, I have no problem applying for them if I can find them, but it was not going to be the primary focus. That even peer-reviewed literature work was not going to be the primary focus. What I really wanted to do was do something to help people, right? And the rest of the scientific community is writing tons of grants and writing tons of papers that doesn't seem to be helping people. So what I saw was an opportunity to kind of go a different route. So once I had kind of reverse engineered the pharmaceutical triple anticoagulant therapy into a natural version, it was, well, what's the next step if I really want to do this, right? And the next step was to manufacture a supplement, right? So I ended up using kind of my own resources and have started a supplement company to manufacture and make available this kind of custom designed product for long COVID, which, as far as I know, is the only one on the market that is actually custom designed for long COVID. There's a lot of supplements that are being recommended for and used for long COVID, some with more, some with less scientific basis for saying, okay, let's use this product in long COVID. As far as I know, this is the first kind of custom designed supplement product for long COVID that has actually used the scientific data that's out there already on long COVID to try to develop a product to help people.
Wow. I mean, I just applaud you for that. Because you're literally going, okay, I'm going to do this on my own because people need it. That's so commendable. And I'm sure there's many people out there that are very thankful that you did that. So,
well, part of that decision is I understand how long it takes to develop drugs. Most people don't know this, but it takes anywhere from 10 to 15 years to discover and fully develop and take to market a pharmaceutical drug. So if we had a molecular target like today, right now, that we already knew was validated and worked in long COVID, we are still looking at somewhere probably around at least a 10-year time frame to do drug discovery, optimization, go through all the preclinical evaluation and clinical trials and take it to market. 10 years is a long time if you're suffering from a disease like long COVID.
right.
People with long COVID don't have time to wait for pharmaceutical industry to develop a drug. They need something now, which is really what has been my goal, is to give people something that they can try now, that they have the freedom to try because they don't need a physician to write them a prescription, and that they can afford and is safe.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know exact timeframes, but I knew something along those lines. Think of, just what you could lose, and just decline in 10 years. What can change in a year, but 10 years. Just so much of life could be lost in 10 years of waiting.
Well, in long COVID is a really debilitating disease for a lot of people. Obviously, there's a spectrum of severity, right? Some people have a fairly mild case, but some people have really severe cases. But I think a fairly average case of long COVID it's impacting your ability to function in daily life. Fatigue's a big part of it. You're not able to get out of bed. You're not able to be a present parent for your kids. It impacts
Right.
your ability to work and sustain your life and your lifestyle. Like there's nothing that it doesn't impact because it is so debilitating because two of the core symptoms of long COVID are fatigue and brain fog. So
Right.
you're tired and you have this lack of mental clarity that just keeps you from functioning.
Right. Hmm. Yeah. And I'm curious too, just the pathophysiology, if you will. The microclots, are they, if that's the basis, are they essentially causing like ischemic damage?
So one of the really attractive parts of microclot hypothesis is it explains a lot of the downstream symptoms in a pathophysiological way, right? So the theory is, and there's really good data that supports this part, is that spike protein binds to a clotting protein in the blood called fibrinogen and causes a change in conformation in fibrinogen to an unnatural conformation. And in this unnatural conformation, the fibrinogen aggregates and forms these microclots, and they've been labeled scientifically as amyloids. They're
Mm,
amyloids of fibrinogen. And if you think you've heard that term before, you might have. Amyloids are typically what we talk about in Alzheimer's, right? So amyloids of A beta and tau protein are the plaques that build up in Alzheimer's that cause all of those neurological effects. So the microclots can be properly called amyloids of fibrinogen. They're sticky, they get big, they bind to platelets and activate platelets. They bind to and capture other proteins and red blood cells. The capturing and sticking to the red blood cells starts impacting oxygen delivery into tissues, right? That's where a lot of the fatigue issues come.
okay.
The presence of the microclots causes inflammation in the endothelial lining of the circulatory system, right? So you start getting inflammatory effects that kicks off immune system effects. And really, if you trace the pathophysiology downstream, you can tie a majority of the symptoms in long COVID kind of directly back to a mechanistic cause that's tied to microclots.
Right. Wow. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. I'm thinking of, I have a family member, even specifically, that she has palpitations as a symptom, and she takes a mitochondrial support supplement. And when she's off, right, when she's trying to go off of it, and when she goes off of it, the palpitations.
So, most long COVID patients have some kind of cardiac involvement, shortness of breath, some kind of heart palpitation or tachycardia or inability to control their heart rate to the point of developing POTS in some patients. So they have the cardiac environment, and then the mitochondrial involvement is known in long COVID. People are studying it. I think there's definitely a link between the overall energetic system in the body mechanistically and what's going on with long COVID. Whether that's an indirect or a directly caused by the microclots, I think is a question that needs to be fleshed out more. But you could actually lay out on paper, okay, microclot to mitochondria, yes, there's a mechanistic connection there through various signaling pathways where it's likely that the mitochondrial misfunction could be a downstream effect of microclotting. So if you resolve the microclotting, you'll resolve the mitochondrial dysfunction. But
Mhm.
if you're just addressing the mitochondrial dysfunction
You're not.
and you withdraw that, then you haven't fixed the problem, and it's going to actually revert back to suffering from the mitochondrial dysfunction.
Right.
And I think that's the same for a lot of the neurological effects as well, the brain fog, and even things like the anxiety and depression that seem to be caused by long COVID. You can treat those kind of as far downstream as you can, right, where the symptoms occurring.
Right.
But if you withdraw that therapy, you're likely going to relapse back to where you were. And this is what really annoys me about the scientific literature is we know how to think about these things this way. This is now the current way we think about oncology, right? We're always thinking about in a given pathway in oncology, are we targeting molecular targets way down at the bottom of the signaling cascade? Are we targeting the middle? Are we targeting the top?
Mm-hmm.
And we look at it, all of the mechanisms, and we think about where's the optimal place to intervene.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't brought that thinking over into long COVID, and I don't know why. And it's one of the things that it's science is so sophisticated and advanced now.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't take years to bring these approaches and these ways of thinking about problems over into other disease states.
Right. Wow. This is such an interesting conversation to me. I'm hoping we can ask lots of questions for the listeners too. So I'm just thinking, if somebody's here listening to this and maybe suffering with long COVID, can you tell us, more about your product, your supplement? And
Sure. So with microclots and triple anticoagulant therapy, what seems to be important is to have these three mechanisms of action of these three compounds being delivered all together. So in the pharmaceutical version, it's these three pharmaceutical drugs. They each have a different mechanism of action that helps break up the microclots and help people recover from long COVID. The natural version basically has natural ingredients there's a natural replacement for each pharmaceutical in there. So there's turmeric in there, which has curcumin in it, which happens to be a factor 10A inhibitor, which is an anticoagulant mechanism of action of Eliquis or Pixit, right? So that's one. Turmeric is one component. There's white willow bark in there, which is a COX-1 and 2 inhibitor,
okay.
which it's replacing aspirin in triple anticoagulant therapy. And then the last one is there's Dan Shen extract in the product. And that actually contains two natural products that are sorry. It contains two natural products that are P2Y1 and P2Y12 receptor antagonists. That's the mechanism of action of clopidogrel, which is the third pharmaceutical component in triple anticoagulant therapy. So it's needing to take all three of these together that actually gives the product the natural version or the pharmaceutical version. It's all three mechanisms together that make the product effective. So that's what's in my product. Then there's some black pepper extract in there, which
Mm-hmm.
helps with the bioavailability of turmeric. So that's a known thing that's done in the supplement world to help make sure that the turmeric isn't all chewed up in metabolism really quickly. And then I also added some beetroot extract into my product, mainly because to help with the fatigue. So most people know beetroot extract. It's got nitrous oxide in it. It helps with tissue oxygenation, muscle oxygenation, right? It's used by a lot of people when they work out to help oxygenate better and have more energy. So I added in there because that same mechanism and actually does, when people have taken it, work well to help people with the fatigue associated with long COVID, because it helps improve oxygen delivery into the tissues that helps combat some of the fatigue.
Wonderful. And then, so this is for a prescribed amount of time that they need to take?
So the time factor is kind of linked to how severe somebody's long COVID is.
Got
So
it.
in the pharmaceutical cocktail study, they stratified the patient population into kind of mild and severe long COVID. So the mild group was on pharmaceutical triple anticoagulant therapy for 2 to 4 months. The severe long COVID group was on the pharmaceutical triple anticoagulant therapy for 4 to 6 months. So those were kind of the two windows in that study. Now, the natural version is less potent, right? That's why it's safer. That's why you can get it over the counter. So what I have been telling people is to try to take it for 3 to 6 months and
Okay.
then kind of see how you're doing at that point. Ideally, though, this is something that you should be able to take, recover, and stop taking.
Right.
So
Not ongoing therapy.
that's right. The mechanism here is what triple anticoagulant therapy is doing to the microclots is when you take it, either the pharmaceutical or the natural version, it's slowing down formation of new microclots. It's in slowing down the formation of new microclots, it lets the body deal with the microclots that are already present, break them down. Breaking down microclots by the body is very slow because they're unnatural clots. So it's a slower process than normal breaking down of clots. So, but both of the therapies, what it's really doing is slowing down so you're not making any more. so the body can deal with the microclots that are present. And then once those are cleared and you're not making more, assuming that there's not viral reservoirs and you're having some of those continuing issues, you should be able to taper off the therapy.
Wonderful. Awesome. I'm looking at your website here. If you want to give us a plug there.
Sure, sure. So I call the product CircuGuard, CircuGuard. So people can get it. They can go to CircuGuard.com. It's an easy website to remember. That's kind of the easy way to get there. On there, there's a link also to the full company website and the full product description that has all of the gory science details, including the references to the literature.
Yes, that's what I was looking at, was
That's all there. And you can find the rest of my work if you go to keithcellisphd.com. That's kind of the central hub. And so when I started doing this and I realized the path I was going down, I wanted to make sure that the information that I was providing and the research I was doing, that people could actually get it and read it and decide for themselves what they thought of it. So all the research I did on really examining and understanding microclot hypothesis and what it was saying, and then designing the custom formulated product, I published all of that on Substack. So if you go to keithcellisphd.com, there's a link to the CircuGuard page where you can go buy it. There's a link to the Substack. I also made TikTok videos talking about a lot of that content. There's a link to my TikTok, and those videos are also on YouTube. And people can also join my email list if they're interested in hearing more updates on a continuing basis and more of what I'm working on long COVID.
Wonderful. Wonderful. This has been awesome. Wonderful. So we'll put those links in the show notes so that, people, it's easy to remember, but they can just click on the link. I'm curious. So do you think, is your work continuing on long haul, the long COVID? Do you see yourself, expanding into other areas down the road?
The answer to both those is yes.
Yeah.
So I am working on a couple other products for long COVID. So I'm a mechanisms guy, right? So I've been working on microclots is a really good central mechanism, but there's of course more things we can do. I've been looking a lot of people think the origin of long COVID is gut dysbiosis and viral reservoirs. There's a viral reservoir somewhere in the body, and the GI tract is actually one of the leading candidates. And that's why a lot of long COVID patients suffer from some kind of GI issues, including leaky gut. So I'm working on a product for that. So I am trying to working on designing a few more products that are going to work kind of all together to really help people to get better. And viral reservoirs is kind of the next one that I'm focusing on. And then the other thing that I'm really trying to work on, and I haven't figured out yet, is trying to help rebalance the immune system and really understanding what effects long COVID is having on the immune system, and then how we can actually reverse those. That's another thing. That's more of a long-term project because I am not an immunologist, so I am having to learn a lot of immunology, which is a whole other rabbit hole to go down. So those are kind of what I'm working on. And long term, there is this thought that when long COVID hit, there are other kind of diseases out there where people were saying, hey, we have something similar. What's going on here? ME/CFS is one of them, Lyme disease, West Nile. And what seems to be happening is people are starting to look at all of these kind of together as what are being grouped as post-viral reactivation syndromes. And my long-term plan is, at the end of the day, when I look at all of those, they have similar symptoms, which you would think means they have at least similar or overlapping mechanisms at some point. But at the end of the day, each of them is going to have a unique molecular initiation event, because they are different diseases being caused by different things, right? So I think as the science develops, I'm planning on trying to branch out and create more products for those other post-viral reactivation diseases, because I think there's opportunities there. There's people that aren't being helped there.
Right.
And I think scientifically there's opportunities to create things to help people where you don't necessarily have to go through the whole drug discovery and development process. And my hope is I'm trying to create products to help people for the next 5 to 10 years. if I can stop selling CircuGuard because pharmaceutical industry developed a real drug that treats long COVID, I will be happy to do that one day. But
Yeah.
I don't see that day coming anytime soon. So what I'm trying to do is take what we do know scientifically and kind of merge that with what we know about supplements and natural products and mechanisms and try to discover things that can help people now to help improve quality of life until some day comes, if it ever does.
This has been so great. Thank you so much. I feel like I've learned a ton. I'm really excited to share, this episode, and just more people to get the help they need. Like you said, the therapy's out there, but it's not accessible. So they can, that particular family member, I'm gonna send
Yeah,
them your website right now when we get off
great.
the call here. So thank you so much, Dr. Ellis. Again, your websites, we've got CircuGuard.com and then KeithCEllisPhD.com, again in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for having me.